The rise of Ivan IV, how Ivan the Terrible invented the secret police. What if I told you that Russia's first Tsar was crowned in a thunderstorm, raised in a palace of horrors, tortured cats for fun, and later fed his enemies to wild dogs? What if I told you that this same man built St. Basil's Cathedral, and also murdered his own son in a fit of rage? This isn't fiction. This is the rise and terrifying reign of Ivan IV, better known as Ivan the Terrible. But was he truly terrible? Or was he something far worse? From a neglected child surrounded by scheming nobles, to a blood-soaked autocrat who created Russia's first secret police, Ivan's story is a roller coaster of betrayal, brutality, and bizarre brilliance. How did a traumatized boy become the architect of Russia's darkest chapter? Why did he divide his empire into two realms, one ruled by law, the other by terror? What drove him to purge entire cities, roast his enemies alive, and plunge his nation into a 24-year war that ended exactly where it began? This is not just history. This is a psychological thriller, a political horror, and a cautionary tale all rolled into one. Stick around, because by the end of this video, you'll understand how one man's paranoia reshaped a nation and echoed through centuries of Russian tyranny. On August 25, 1530, as Moscow was being pounded by a storm that looked like Thor had lost his temper, Vasily III finally got the heir he'd been praying for. But this wasn't your average royal baby. Vasily had scandalized the Orthodox Church by divorcing his first wife to marry Elena Glinskaya, and one monk ominously warned, an evil act will spawn an evil son. Cue thunderclap. Ivan was born into Muscovy, a tiny, landlocked Orthodox duchy surrounded by Catholic Poland, Lithuania, and Islamic Khanates like Kazan and Crimea. It was like being the nerdy kid in a school full of bullies. Muscovy was weak, fragmented, and politically fragile. In 1533, Vasily III died of an infection, leaving toddler Ivan as Grand Prince. Elena Glinskaya took over as regent, ruling with a steel spine and a dagger behind her back. But Muscovy's real power brokers, the boyars, weren't thrilled about taking orders from a woman. They tolerated Elena until 1538, when she mysteriously died. Poison? Almost certainly. With Elena gone, Muscovy descended into aristocratic chaos. The boyars treated young Ivan like a royal prop, dressing him up for foreign dignitaries, then tossing him back into his palace like a forgotten doll. He wore rags, begged for food, and watched his mentors get skinned alive. It was like growing up in a horror movie directed by Machiavelli. Neglected and traumatized, Ivan began torturing animals, his twisted way of mimicking the cruelty around him. But beneath the sociopathic tendencies was a calculating mind. At 13, Ivan made his first power move. He ordered the execution of Boyar Andrei Shwisky by feeding him to wild dogs. It was medieval Muscovy's version of, "I'm the captain now." By 14, Ivan was roaming Moscow with his gang, beating up civilians like a royal delinquent. But he also discovered religion, falling under the influence of Metropolitan Macarius, who filled his head with visions of Moscow as the Third Rome, the last bastion of Orthodox Christianity after the fall of Constantinople. In 1547, Ivan was crowned the first Tsar of all Rus, a title that screamed imperial ambition. The coronation was drenched in Byzantine symbolism, signaling that Ivan wasn't just a ruler, he was God's chosen autocrat. 3 weeks later, he married Anastasia Romanovna, a member of the Romanov family. Yes, those Romanovs. As we dive deeper into the madness of Ivan the Terrible, don't forget to follow our channel, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you never miss a moment of intrigue. We've got more jaw-dropping stories coming your way, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. Your support helps us grow. Ivan's early reign was shockingly progressive. He formed the Chosen Council, a brain trust of reformers, and launched Russia's first Zemsky Sober National Assembly. He revised the legal code, curbed aristocratic abuses, and created the Streltsy, Russia's first standing army. For a moment, Ivan looked less terrible and more Tsar the reformer. But Ivan's reforms had a catch. They were designed to crush the boyars. When 70 commoners complained about a corrupt official, Ivan had them stripped naked in the snow and set their beards on fire. Justice, Muscovite style. It was June 16, 1552, and Ivan IV, now secure on his throne and feeling spicy, decided it was time to show the world how a proper Tsar throws down. He rode out at the head of a massive army, not just with swords and spears, but with a prayer schedule that would make a monk blush. Ivan begged God daily to help him crush the Muslim Khanate of Kazan, and apparently God was in the mood for smiting. By September 2nd, Ivan's forces had surrounded Kazan like a medieval boa constrictor. They cut off supplies, poisoned water sources, and built earthen walls to block cavalry charges. It was siege warfare with a side of divine wrath. On October 13, just 2 days after Ivan's son Dmitry was born, Kazan fell. The Khanate tried to resurrect itself later, but it was basically a zombie state. Ivan had done it, and he'd done it with style. Had Ivan died right then, historians would have written sonnets about his potential. But fate had other plans. In 1553, Ivan fell gravely ill. Thinking he was about to meet his maker, he summoned the boyars and asked them to swear loyalty to baby Dmitry. The boyars looked at each other, shrugged, and said, "Nah, we prefer your cousin." Ivan survived, but his trust in the boyars didn't. He emerged from his sickbed like a man reborn, except this version was fueled by paranoia and vengeance. By 1557, Ivan had annexed Astrakhan and gained access to the Caspian Sea. But he wanted more, specifically the Baltic Sea. Livonia, a crumbling Catholic state in modern-day Latvia and Estonia, looked ripe for conquest. When Poland-Lithuania's King Sigismund forced Livonia into a treaty, Ivan saw red. As soon as the snow melted, he launched a full-scale invasion. At first, it was a cakewalk. By 1560, Livonia was in ruins, and its Grand Master was executed in Moscow. But in 1561, a new Grand Master pulled a diplomatic judo move. He surrendered to Sigismund, not Ivan, and invited the Protestant Swedes to join the party. Ivan's easy war turned into a 20-year slog. The timing couldn't have been worse. Ivan's son Dmitry died. His beloved wife Anastasia was likely poisoned. Then Metropolitan Macarius, his spiritual anchor, passed away. Ivan spiraled. In 1563, he beat a soldier to death with his own hands. Then, in 1564, his top general Andrei Kurbsky defected to Lithuania. Ivan was so furious, he announced his abdication. The boyars panicked. Without Ivan, Muscovy could collapse. They begged him to stay. Ivan agreed, but only if he could create a personal kingdom within Russia, ruled by him alone. Thus was born the Oprichnina. Ivan split Russia into two, the Zemshina, where things stayed normal-ish, and the Oprichnina, where Ivan played God. He cherry-picked the richest towns, and the borders were so chaotic that one street could be in the Zemshina and the next in the Oprichnina. It was like living in a horror movie with invisible tripwires. Enter the Oprichniki, Ivan's personal death squad. Dressed in black, riding black horses and driving black carriages, they were Russia's first secret police. Their job? Terrorize everyone. Torture, rape, murder, nothing was off limits. Their HQ reportedly saw 20 deaths a day. Their leader, Malyuta Skuratov, was a sadist who treated Moscow like his personal playground of horror. In 1570, Ivan became convinced, based on forged documents, that Novgorod was plotting to join Lithuania. He rode out with his Oprichniki and unleashed a month-long massacre. Citizens were hanged, drowned, and axed. Between 6,000 and 15,000 people died. Novgorod, once a proud city, was reduced to ash and trauma. Back in Moscow, Ivan executed boyars he claimed were in on the plot. At this point, Muscovy was living in a state of constant terror. No one was safe. Not even Ivan's own men. In 1571, Ivan's paranoia backfired spectacularly. He ignored warnings about a Crimean Tatar invasion, trusting his Oprichniki's intel that the force was small. It wasn't. It was 120,000 strong. Ivan grabbed his treasure and fled. Moscow was left defenseless. The Tatars burned everything but the Kremlin. Over 160,000 people were killed or enslaved. The river changed course from the sheer number of bodies. Humiliated, Ivan abolished the Oprichnina in 1572. Then, in classic Ivan fashion, he punished the Oprichniki for failing to protect Moscow. Blood for blood. By the early 1570s, Ivan had already burned Novgorod to the ground, turned Moscow into a haunted house, and created a secret police so sadistic they made medieval torture look like a spa day. But he wasn't done. Oh no. Despite the Baltic invasion being a flaming disaster, Swedes reclaiming Livonia, Poland-Lithuania invading Russia, Ivan doubled down. Instead of diplomacy, he chose his favorite pastime, roasting people alive. Literally. Opponents were skewered like kebabs over open flames. It was less reign of terror and more barbecue of doom. But Ivan's real enemy wasn't Poland or Sweden. It was the echo chamber inside his skull. Paranoia had become his closest advisor. While foreign armies marched across his borders, Ivan was busy purging boyars who dared blink too loudly. Amid this chaos, one glimmer of hope emerged, Ivan the Younger. A competent general, he fought off the Polish-Lithuanian forces with skill and valor. The boyars, desperate for sanity, wrote to Tsar Ivan, suggesting his son lead the army. They meant lead the troops, but Ivan the Terrible heard replace the Tsar. And when you're a paranoid autocrat with a history of feeding people to dogs, you don't take suggestions lightly. In November 1581, Ivan stumbled upon his son's pregnant wife wearing something he deemed inappropriate. His response? Beat her so viciously she miscarried. When his son confronted him, Ivan grabbed his staff and bludgeoned him until his skull cracked like a dropped watermelon. Ivan the Younger died days later. The Tsar reportedly wailed, "My God, what have I done?" But the damage was irreversible. With Dmitri dead, Anastasia gone, and now Ivan the Younger murdered, the only heir left was Fyodor, a sweet, simple soul with the political instincts of a potato. The death of his son finally pierced Ivan's fog of madness. In 1581, he asked the Pope to broker peace with Poland-Lithuania. Russia surrendered all its gains in Livonia. A separate peace with Sweden saw Russia abandon its Baltic ambitions. After 24 years of war, hundreds of thousands dead, and a national trauma so deep it could be seen from space, Russia was back where it started in 1558. All that horror, all that suffering, all for nothing. Just when you thought Ivan's reign couldn't get more bizarre, the Stroganoff family, yes, the same name as the creamy beef dish, decided to play Tsar for a day. In 1583, they sent a private army into Siberia and casually conquered the Khanate there. This random act of conquest opened the door to centuries of Russian expansion into Siberia. It was the only major victory of Ivan's final years, and he had absolutely nothing to do with it. So, hats off to the Stroganoffs. May your beef always be tender. By 1584, Ivan was a shadow of his former self. Too weak to leave bed, he spent his days playing chess. On March 18th, while contemplating his next move, he allegedly suffered a stroke and died. We say allegedly because rumors persist that the boyars finally had enough and strangled him. Either way, the tyrant was gone. Fyodor took the throne, but his reign was so ineffective it triggered the time of troubles, 15 years of civil war, famine, and foreign invasions. It was like the Oprichnina, but with extra chaos and fewer black horses. Russia only stabilized when Anastasia's family, the Romanovs, seized power in 1613. They would rule for the next 300 years, proving that sometimes the best way to fix a mess is to wait for the beef people to take over. So, what do we make of Ivan the Terrible? He was the first Tsar of Russia. He built St. Basil's Cathedral. He expanded the empire. He also murdered his son, created a torture state, and turned paranoia into policy. And while some argue that Grozny means formidable rather than terrible, let's be honest, terrible fits like a glove dipped in blood. Worse still, Ivan's legacy didn't die with him. Centuries later, Joseph Stalin reportedly admired Ivan, seeing in him a kindred spirit. The secret police, the purges, the cult of personality, it all echoed Ivan's blueprint. History didn't just repeat itself. It remixed Ivan's greatest hits and played them on loop. Ivan may have been the first crazed autocrat to terrorize Russia, but he was far from the last. If you love gripping tales of history's most outrageous rulers, spine-chilling betrayals, and empires built on blood and ambition, don't forget to follow our channel, subscribe, and click that notification bell so you never miss a moment of intrigue. We've got more jaw-dropping stories coming your way, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's next. History isn't just dates and dusty books. It's drama, danger, and dark deeds. So stick with us, and let's uncover the past like never before.